welcome to the Poverty Truth Network chat show. I'm Andrew, and throughout this series, I'm meeting with commissioners from around the United Kingdom to find out what is going on in their Poverty Truth Commission, begin to hear some of the wisdom that is coming from their commission, and then explore some of the ways in which we might work together as a network. Today, I'm with Steph, Lizzie and Nadine from the Manchester Poverty Truth Commission. Welcome, everyone.
Hi.
It's good to have you here. And with all these shows, what we've done is we've asked you to come with an item that you could not live without, to kind of introduce yourself a little bit with that item. So, Steph, over to you first. What have you brought for us that you couldn't live without?
I brought my toy lamb. She's very well worn, which is why she has the coat. She was given to me when I was born, and she's been everywhere with me, like to university and wherever I've lived. She always comes with me, and she's a good comforter if I'm feeling sad about something.
It does look a very well-worn lamb,
Yeah.
and it does look like that the neck's struggling a little bit.
A little bit. She's been repaired a few times.
Nadine, how about you? What have you brought?
Me, I have brought my Bible. So I am a Christian, and God has carried me through in my life. So, you know, the Bible brings me a lot of comfort, brings me a lot of hope and strength in my life. So yeah, that's my go-to that I can't live without.
Fantastic. And how about you, Lizzie? What have you brought for us?
Well, living in inner city Manchester, there aren't a huge number of kind of green spaces. So over the years, this has become more and more important. I don't know whether it's something to do with getting old, but watching things grow, like planting seeds and then watching things grow, has just given me so much kind of joy and life, and yeah, just lovely. Like over lockdown, I've managed to get an allotment, which is just great because it's at like a tutorial there on my bike, and then have a bit of time on my own and just space and greenery and get my fingernails dirty. It's great.
You in Manchester have been running as a commission for about 12, 18 months now. I guess, Lizzie, you're one of the facilitators. Just tell us where you are up to, I guess, as you entered lockdown, and then how things developed through these last few months.
Yeah, so I think we've been running for just over a year when lockdown happened, and we got to the stage we'd spent a really long time getting to know each other, all the commissioners getting to know each other and thinking about what poverty looks like in Manchester. And then we just decided on our 3 kind of topics that we want to look into. We had this great meeting where we thought we knew what we were going to talk about, and then it all kind of changed over the course of the session. And we are going to be looking at exploitation. We're going to be looking at child poverty and stuff around the benefit system. And then lockdown happened, so we've been doing some other different things over that time. We've still been meeting on Zoom a little bit, but I'm really ready for September, when we're going to start kind of thinking about some solutions together.
Steph, I guess as somebody who's been involved in that process, what's been some of the things that have really struck you about it? What's kind of really got your attention as you've both been with other community commissioners and then began to meet as a commission as a whole?
One of the things that really struck me was the similarity between people on both sides. So you've got the 15 people who were there because of experience of poverty, and then 15 people from business and civic leaders. And I kind of assumed that it would be a case of broadly 15 working class people and against 15 middle class. But actually, when you listen to the stories from everyone there, you could have quite a few cases where you could start off with what sounds like one person's story, but then part of the way along it splits, and you have one person who becomes someone who's experiencing poverty and then one person who carries on into a professional career. And there are quite a number of cases where you could have people from working class backgrounds with single mums living on council estates where one had continued in poverty and one had gone on to a professional career, or where you had people who were brought up in middle class backgrounds who were well educated, had a really good life, but then at some point for one of them something happened that sent them off down into poverty. Or you could have like a bereavement or a marriage breakdown or an illness happened, and for some people that triggered going into poverty, and for some people it didn't. So it's just been really interesting to see the commonality of experiences, and that we have got a lot of shared background, and even things like, you know, some people are bullied at school, some people struggle with some subjects and not others, some people have difficulty getting into a career. You know, even when you've got what you think is a group of poor people and a group of professionals, we're all just people together, and we've got a lot of shared experiences, and that brought a lot of humanity into the process, that we weren't antagonistic, but actually we were coming together with a variety of shared experiences, but also diverse experiences that meant that we could both work together from our shared experience so we could understand each other, but also our diverse experience meant we could each bring different expertise and different ideas or different information to make for a really successful project.
Brilliant. So in some ways the sharedness and the commonalities actually become a strength, which begin to help people understand one another and realize that actually it's only sometimes something that happens to you, or just one slight decision that's made, that means that you end up in different places.
Yeah, and it's good, particularly, you know, my experiences being ill and trying to access the benefit system or medical care, you get used to interacting with professionals as professionals, and you can have quite antagonistic relationships because they don't believe you. But actually in this group where you just sat down and shared your experiences, and there were professionals there with experience of chronic illness, so they weren't there to oppose me.
Earlier, Lizzie, you were telling us a little bit about the different task groups, and one of those groups is the exploitation group. And Nadine, I think you're involved in that group. Tell us why that group seemed to be a really obvious place for you to spend time thinking and working on issues.
I chose that group because primarily I have a particular focus on young people, especially people from very marginalised backgrounds, that may be young carers, that may be living with parents that are struggling with drug and alcohol addictions, or have disabilities, so they will be young carers, and children and young people in care, and in particular transitioning from care into adulthood. So, and I chose that because of my personal experience. So, you know, I've journeyed through my childhood in very similar circumstances to what I've just described, and as a result ended up in the care system, which is quite a very vulnerable place to be. And there is an assumption that systems and processes are in place, but it's actually when you're in that and trying to access those services, if you even are aware they exist, and not always there. So it then leaves people very vulnerable and at the risk of exploitation, of falling into crime, you know, youth offending, you know, shoplifting, prostitution, and then obviously we've got the issue with county lines and the drugs and stuff like that. So
you mentioned that in some ways that's part of your story, and you've had opportunity to share that story with the Commission. How did that go, and how did that feel to kind of share your story, which is incredibly personal and probably has a lot of pain associated with it? How did it feel to share that with others?
It's been quite liberating, in the sense of sharing my journey and my personal experience in order to educate and inform policy, really. around those areas. So there was a particular instance where I shared my story, and a police officer, I think he might be the chief, I'm not sure of his title, but he's quite high up in the police, who's one of our commissioners, and he was shocked at my story. So I had an incident when I was about 10 or 11, and I was kind of out hanging around the streets because of things that were happening at home. My dad was an alcoholic, my mum had mental health issues and was in and out of the psychiatric unit, so I was kind of left a lot to my own devices. And I remember a police officer, you know, would be kind of a group of us and we might be a bit cheeky or be doing something, and the police officer grabbed me by the throat and pinned me up against the wall, and I never forgot it, you know. And he was shocked, you know, at that had happened to me when he knew kind of my home life. So he said that he was definitely going to take that back. I mean, it felt a bit awkward because I didn't want him to feel bad, and it was, you know, just around the 1989 Children's Act had come into play. So, you know, things have changed since then, but it struck him, and he actually apologised to me afterwards, after the meeting, and said, I'm really sorry that happened to you, and that he wanted to take that back and share with, you know, police officers that are working with young people that are perpetrate or classed as perpetrators of crime, when actually the victims a lot of the time that have been coerced into criminal activity or out of desperation, you know, they're doing things or they just don't have any home guidance. So
that really illustrates the importance of sharing story to change practice, you know, and actually taking what was a very challenging experience for somebody and it actually having a positive effect into the future. I know that when we all went into lockdown, one of the things that you did as a commission was start to say, well, actually, some of us have experience of what it means to be in a kind of lockdown. And here's some of our coping strategies. Lizzie, do you want to explain how you went about kind of finding those things out and then kind of communicating them to other people?
As lockdown happened, we know that suddenly a whole load of people started to experience, you know, job loss or struggling to get the food that they needed, and we were aware that in some ways it's a really good opportunity to get people to think about the fact that actually this is normal life for a lot of people all the time. But we didn't want to be kind of patronizing or be like, you know, yeah, this is what it's always like. We wanted to be really sensitive about that, but still make the point to kind of get people to think about this is not okay. It's never been okay. It's not okay now, and it should never be normal. So we had a couple of meetings with our commissioners and started to talk about what are the things that should never be normal, and came up with some kind of sentences or phrases that shouldn't, you know, it should never be normal to not be able to access the food that you need. And then we did a session where we talked about this should always be normal. It should always be normal to look out for your neighbours. It should always be normal to be thankful to your bin men for doing the job that they do, you know. And we worked alongside the Framing Institute to word those phrases in a way that would hopefully have maximum impact. And then we've kind of put those together on social media, on Twitter, and the response has been incredible. I don't know what the engagement numbers have been, but it has become a really powerful tool in helping people to think about, wow, you know, this should never be normal and this should always be normal. So that's kind of what we've been doing a little bit over lockdown.
the group that I'm in, the task group that I'm in, is looking at benefits. And just before lockdown, I'd been talking with them about this idea called a job guarantee, which, if it's on a national scale, would mean that the government, instead of paying unemployment benefits and in return you have to spend 35 hours a week looking for work, they would pay you the benefits, and in return you'd do some work for the community, so you'd be paid to do community work basically. And I was suggesting that you could perhaps do that on a local level from the council. So if you had people who were struggling to pay their council tax or were in council tax arrears, or people in things like temporary accommodation where you have to pay for services on top, then one way that people could pay for that would be that if they did some community work, they'd then get credited with, say, £10 per hour towards paying off council tax or debt or for services. And some of the benefits of that would be obviously the work going on in the community. You could have people in the parks, maintaining paths, maintaining flower beds, but you can have so many different things. So in our group, one of our experts by experience is a really good artist, and you could do something where you get him to draw some pictures, you make stencils, you could put murals on walls or on utilities boxes. You can ask people who are musicians, can go into residential homes, for example, and play live music to the people living there. There's just so many different things that can be done that generally they don't make a profit for anyone, so the private sector is not going to do it. They're not strictly necessary for life, so central government doesn't tend to fund it, but they're things that really improve the community well-being, and they give people who are unemployed or underemployed something that they can go out and do and contribute to the community, so they feel that they're doing something worthwhile and has purpose, and that they themselves can appreciate. You know, if you go out and do some work in the park, then the next time you go in the park you can appreciate what's been done. So that was something that I've suggested to our task group. We then went into lockdown, so we've not been able to explore that any further, but I'm really hopeful that we can talk about that with the council and we can explore how that can work. Perhaps we can liaise with job centres, they can fit that into the requirements they place on people so that they lessen work search requirements if someone's doing some community work. And if this was something that worked in our council, then potentially you could spread it to other parts of the country as well. And ideally, one day, perhaps the central government would see that as an interesting idea and be like, actually, what is the point of sticking all these people on unemployment benefit looking for jobs that largely don't exist, when we could pay them to do something meaningful, which is what they want. That's why they're looking for work. So you might as well pay them to do work that they can enjoy and that the community can appreciate.
It strikes me as you're talking that there are lots of different things that happen in different Poverty Truth Commissions and ideas that people come up with and schemes that start to develop, that actually if we found a way of communicating about them, we might be able to see them emerge in other places and have benefit across the UK, not just in that particular place.
Yeah, I think that's one of the strengths of the Poverty Truth Commission, is that so often the best solutions come from local areas and from the grassroots and from the people who live it and experience it. But the difficulty is often then getting out to national scale. So you need something like this where you try something on a local level that you then communicate to other local areas who can then try it. And eventually you hope there'll be enough evidence that you can go to central government and say, look, this is how it needs to be done, or a good way to do it, and perhaps you can consider funding it so it can be done even better.
Thanks, Steph. Nadine, is there anything that you kind of think, we're looking at this in Manchester, but it would be great if actually other places were looking at this and we kind of swap notes and learn together? Is there anything that strikes you as being particularly helpful for that?
Yeah, one of the things, just when Lizzie was sharing about the Framing Institute, so some of the work we did over lockdown, was the focus shift around being vulnerable versus being in a vulnerable situation, which really struck me in that how we word things. So, you know, I'm a vulnerable adult. disempowers individuals. So around thinking how we, identify ourselves, how we, label other people. And I thought that was quite powerful, because a lot of the time it's a circumstance and a situation. So just because you are a single parent doesn't necessarily mean you're vulnerable, or just because you're disabled doesn't make you vulnerable. It can put you in vulnerable situations if you've not got needs met, or so looking at kind of what is vulnerable and what isn't. But the other area for me would be for the other networks to look at young people, because I think they are quite an overlooked group in society in general. I mean, we don't have any youth service from central government. It's up to independent authorities whether they commission. Some young people have got families and secure environments where they don't necessarily need that, but we've also got a lot of young people that are left to their own devices. So around looking at that, because it impacts everybody, and from my personal life experience and the environment I grew up in and the community that I live in, there's a lot of issues with young people that are being criminalised by communities, by counsellors, by neighbourhoods. So looking at young people really as a group, because they're the next generation coming up, and they need investment into them to create opportunities, and look at the issues that they're voiceless with because they're not old enough, or they're looked down on because they're too young, they're not experienced.
What wisdom would you like to share with the wider network from your experiences of being involved in Manchester Poverty Truth Commission? Lizzie, let's start with you.
When we jump to making solutions without having those relationships in place, we're not going to get the best solutions, but the best solutions come from a slow process of relationship.
We're all people together. We're not opponents arguing over whether to do something or not, and we're not antagonists arguing over who gets the pot of resources. We're all working together from a diversity of experiences, but also similar experiences, all striving to see an alleviation of poverty in Manchester.
And finally, Nadine?
Don't be afraid or ashamed to share your personal lived experience in professional environments, because in order to have positive change, it's a strength that's needed by policymakers. They need to hear, they need to know, these real life experiences. And from my experience, it's been really positive. So don't be ashamed or embarrassed about it.
Steph, Nadine, Lizzie, thank you so much for sharing some of your experiences. On the screen, you'll notice the Twitter handles for Manchester Poverty Truth, so you can see some of the messages that they've been sharing over COVID. If you want to find out more about the wider network, it's povertytruthnetwork.org, and I look forward to seeing you all again soon.